I want you to understand something about land in Texas before I tell you this story. Land in Texas is not just property. It is not an investment vehicle or a lifestyle choice or a backdrop for a nice house. Land in Texas is identity. It is what your grandfather worked and what your father maintained and what you are expected to hand to your children in better condition than you received it. When somebody builds something on your land without your permission in Texas, they are not making a legal error. They are committing something closer to an offense against the order of things, and the people around you understand that and expect you to respond accordingly. I responded accordingly. My name is Colt Hargrove. I am 48 years old and I own and operate a cattle ranch in Guadalupe County, Texas, outside of Seguin, about 30 miles east of San Antonio. I have owned the ranch for 19 years. I inherited the main parcel from my father, who inherited it from his father, and I have added to it over the years through 2 separate land purchases that expanded the original 312 acres to its current 487 acres. I run about 200 head of Angus cattle. I grow coastal Bermuda hay on the non-grazing acreage, and I have a small but profitable direct sale beef operation that serves restaurants and private buyers in the San Antonio area. The HOA situation requires some explanation because you are probably wondering how a cattle rancher in Guadalupe County has an HOA, and the answer involves a decision I made 12 years ago that seemed sensible at the time, and that I have since revised my opinion of considerably. The eastern edge of my ranch bordered a stretch of county road. 12 years ago, I sold a narrow strip of land along that eastern boundary to a developer named Craig Hollister, who was building a residential community called Copper Creek Ranch, which was one of those suburban developments that used ranch in the name to give buyers the feeling of country living without any of the actual ranching involved. The strip I sold was about 40 feet wide and ran along 600 feet of my eastern fence line. Craig needed it to extend his development road slightly and to create a proper setback for the homes on his eastern row. We negotiated a fair price, and I signed the deed and considered it done. What I had not thought through carefully enough, and this is the mistake I have replayed many times since, was the survey. The survey used for that transaction was an older one, a 1987 survey that my father had commissioned and that I had pulled from the ranch files when Craig's attorney asked for boundary documentation. The 1987 survey was accurate as far as it went, but it used reference monuments that had been in the ground for 35 years, and some of which had shifted or degraded. The eastern boundary line, as depicted in that survey, had a minor error of approximately 14 feet along a 300-foot section toward the southern end of my eastern fence line. 14 feet does not sound like much. On 487 acres, it is rounding error. But 14 feet over 300 feet of boundary is a strip of land that is, in area, about 4,200 square feet, and 4,200 square feet is enough room to build a swimming pool and a surrounding deck. Which is exactly what the Copper Creek Ranch HOA did. I will tell you how it happened because the how matters. Craig Hollister sold the development to a property management company 3 years after it was built. The property management company operated the HOA, which meant they controlled the common area maintenance budget and the capital improvement decisions. The HOA had a community pool as part of its amenities, a modest rectangular pool that was agging by year 6, and that the residents had been requesting an upgrade on for several years. The property management company got bids for a new community pool. The preferred location, based on the site plan they were working from, was in the southeastern corner of the Copper Creek Ranch common area, adjacent to the community park. The site plan they were working from used Craig Hollister's original development survey, which had been based on my 1987 survey with its 14-foot error. In other words, the pool location they chose was, according to their survey, on Copper Creek Ranch common area land. According to the correct legal boundary of my ranch, established by the original deed and confirmed by a new survey I would eventually commission, it was on my land. They broke ground in April. I was in the north pasture moving cattle when one of my ranch hands, a man named Eddie Garza, who had been with me for 11 years and who had the specific awareness of someone whose job requires him to know where the boundaries are, came to find me and said there was construction equipment on the far side of the eastern fence. I drove the ATV to the eastern fence line. There was an excavator on the other side, about 30 feet from my fence, digging what was clearly going to be a pool foundation. There were construction workers, a site supervisor, and stacks of materials. The site supervisor saw me at the fence and waved in the easy way of someone who does not know he is doing anything wrong. I called my attorney. His name is Bud Tartum. He is a property attorney in Seguin who has handled ranch boundary issues for 30 years and who had worked with my family going back to my father's time. I described what I was seeing. Bud said two things: do not do anything to the equipment or the construction workers, and get him a copy of the deed description and the 1987 survey by end of day. I got him both within 2 hours. Bud called me back that evening. He said the 1987 survey had a known issue. He had seen it in other boundary disputes in the county, older surveys using degraded monuments that produced small but real errors, and that based on the deed description and the GPS coordinates of the actual corners, the construction site was partially on my land. He estimated, pending a new survey, that the pool excavation was centered about 12 to 14 feet into my property from the correct boundary. He said he would send a cease and desist letter to the property management company the next morning. He said the new survey needed to happen immediately and he had a licensed surveyor he trusted. He said I should document everything with photos and video. I photographed and filmed the construction site from my fence line, with my ranch and my fence clearly in frame, for 20 minutes that evening. Timestamps, GPS data embedded in the photos, the works. Eddie witnessed, and I had him write a brief statement of what he had seen. The cease and desist letter went out the next morning, certified mail, to the property management company and to their general contractor. It explained the boundary dispute, referenced the deed, noted that construction was occurring on land that was not within the development's legal boundaries, and demanded an immediate halt to construction pending resolution of the boundary question. The property management company's response, which arrived 4 days later, was not what I expected. I had expected either a quick acknowledgement or a counter-argument about the surveys. What I got was a letter from their attorney saying that the construction was proceeding on the basis of their survey, which showed the site to be within their property, and that any boundary dispute would need to be resolved through the normal legal process, which could take months, during which construction would continue. They were going to build the pool while the boundary dispute was pending. Bud said this was legally aggressive, but not unusual for a property management company with construction momentum and a deadline. He filed for an emergency injunction to halt construction while the boundary dispute was resolved. The injunction hearing was set for 12 days out. The pool was poured in 8 days. By the time the injunction hearing happened, the pool shell was in the ground, the plumbing was roughed in, and the deck framing had started. The judge reviewed the competing surveys, heard the arguments, and granted a partial injunction. No further construction until the boundary was professionally surveyed by a neutral party agreed to by both sides. But she declined to order demolition of what had already been built pending that survey, because the pool was already substantially complete, and the equitable calculus of demolishing a $100,000 structure before the boundary question was finally resolved did not favor immediate demolition. I sat in that courtroom and watched the judge say those words, and I felt something specific that I will describe to you honestly. It was not rage. It was the cold, settled, certain feeling I mentioned at the beginning of this story. The feeling of a man who knows his land and knows what is on it, and is not, under any circumstances, going to accept any other outcome than the correct one. I told Bud on the courthouse steps, I want the survey expedited. I want the correct boundary established on legal record, and then I want to talk about what I can do with my land. The neutral surveyor was agreed within a week and commissioned immediately. He did his field work over 3 days, using modern GPS equipment and the original deed calls that went back to the 1940s, and he established the boundary with a precision that the 1987 survey had not achieved. His result, the pool was positioned such that approximately 61% of the pool shell and approximately 40% of the surrounding deck area were on my land. The pool had been built on my property. The property management company received the survey results, and their attorney called Bud within 48 hours. Their new position was that the construction had been done in good faith based on their survey, that the surveying error was a shared problem with no bad faith on their part, and that they wanted to negotiate a resolution that avoided costly litigation for both sides. Bud told them that the resolution would involve either purchasing the affected land from me at a price I found acceptable, or removing the pool and restoring my land to its original condition at their expense, or entering a long-term easement agreement with me on terms I found acceptable. Then he called me and said, "What do you actually want, Colt?" I had been thinking about that question since the courthouse steps. I sat in my ranch office for a long time, looking at the aerial photo I had pulled of my eastern fence line with the pool visible on the other side, thinking about what outcome would feel right. I told Bud what I wanted. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "That is going to be something." I said, "I know." He said, "Is it legal?" I thought about it. I said, "It is 100% legal." He said, "Then let's see if they want to negotiate." Bud presented my terms to the property management company's attorney in a phone call that I was on, but did not speak during. The terms were as follows. I was not interested in selling the land. It was my land, and I was keeping it. I was not interested in a long-term easement because I did not want an HOA pool on my ranch property indefinitely. I was willing to offer a short-term transitional easement of 18 months, during which the pool could remain operational, while the HOA made alternative arrangements, in exchange for a payment that reflected the commercial value of the land use plus my legal costs to date, which Bud had calculated at approximately $38,000. At the end of the 18 months, the pool and all associated structures on my land would be removed at the HOA's expense, and the land restored to its original grade and condition. Alternatively, if they did not accept those terms within 30 days, the easement offer was withdrawn, and they would need to remove the pool immediately under court order, which Bud was prepared to seek. The property management company took 22 days to respond. Their counter was a longer easement period, 10 years with a lower payment. Bud said no. They came back with 5 years. Bud said no. They came back with 3 years and a higher payment. Bud said I would consider 18 months at the original payment amount, which was the original offer, and that was the only offer on the table. They accepted. $38,000, paid within 30 days. 18-month easement, clearly defined. Full removal and restoration at their expense at month 18, with a performance bond to guarantee they would follow through. I deposited the check. I banked the legal costs reimbursement. I put the easement document in my files and set a reminder for month 15 to start the removal coordination. Now here is the part of the story that is in the title, and I want to explain it because the cattle trough detail requires context to be understood correctly. The pool was on my land. The easement gave the HOA the right to use it for 18 months. The easement said nothing about what I could do with the rest of my land adjacent to the pool. My land, my choices. My eastern fence ran along the boundary. The pool was just inside that boundary, partially on my land, partially on the HOA's common area. The narrow strip of my land adjacent to the pool, the 14-foot strip that ran 300 feet along that section of boundary, was mine and was not part of the easement. 4 months into the easement period, I had a water management project to do in the eastern pasture. I was improving the watering system for the cattle that grazed in that section. The project involved installing several new water troughs connected to the ranch's main water line. Standard ranch infrastructure, permitted inspected, entirely legal. One of the trough locations was in the eastern pasture, near the fence line. Now I want to be precise about what happened, because precision matters. I did not install a cattle trough in the pool. The pool was on the easement area. I did not touch the pool. What I installed was a standard galvanized steel cattle trough, 4 feet wide by 8 feet long by 2 feet deep, the kind you see on ranches all over Texas, positioned on my land adjacent to my eastern fence line, approximately 30 feet from the pool on the other side of the fence. The cattle that graze the eastern pasture use that trough regularly. Here is what a cattle trough near a fence line means in practice on a working ranch. Cattle come to the water. When cattle come to the water, they bring with them the things that cattle bring, the sounds, the smells, the general organic reality of large animals engaged in agriculture. 200 Angus cattle cycling through an eastern pasture water point throughout the day are not a subtle presence. They are a working ranch. The HOA's pool was 30 feet away on the other side of a standard ranch fence. I am a fair man, and I want to be honest with you. I did not choose that trough location randomly. I had other options for that water point that would have served the same cattle management function equally well. I chose the location adjacent to the eastern fence line because it was legal, because it was good ranch management, and because I believed that people who built a pool on someone else's land without permission and then fought a cease and desist order and poured concrete, while an injunction was pending, deserved to enjoy their pool in the full context of the ranch they had encroached on. The Copper Creek Ranch HOA residents discovered the cattle trough situation gradually over the first 2 weeks after installation. The first complaints came to the property management company, which forwarded them to their attorney, who called Bud. Bud called me. He said, "They want to know if you can move the trough." I said, "The trough is in the optimal location for the eastern pasture water management system. Moving it would require additional infrastructure investment that I'm not prepared to make." Bud passed this along. The property management company's attorney called again and asked if there was a financial arrangement that might make the optimal location shift slightly. I told Bud to tell them the trough location was not negotiable, but that I was open to discussing an acceleration of the removal timeline for the pool, meaning if they wanted to remove the pool earlier than 18 months and restore my land, I would consider releasing them from the remainder of the easement period. This was, I will be honest, the outcome I had been working toward. The pool was on my land, and I wanted it gone. The 18-month easement had been the minimum time I thought they needed to make alternative arrangements, not a period I wanted to extend. Getting them to accelerate the removal was a better outcome than waiting for month 18. They took 11 days to get back to us. Their proposal was early termination of the easement at month 9 in exchange for the trough being moved to a location at least 150 feet from the fence line. I counted, full removal and restoration by month 9, performance bond amount doubled to ensure completion, and I would relocate the trough to a location of my choosing that was at least 100 feet from the fence line. They accepted. The pool was removed at month 8.5. I watched from the eastern fence on the day the demolition crew worked. They were efficient and professional, and they did exactly what the agreement required, removing the pool shell, the deck, the plumbing, and all associated structures, and bringing in a contractor to restore the grade and reseed the disturbed area. The restoration was completed to my inspector's satisfaction. I moved the cattle trough 110 feet from the fence line, which is exactly what I agreed to and which still serves the eastern pasture water management function adequately, if not quite as optimally, as the original position. The boundary markers are now properly recorded with the county. The corrected survey is on file. The 14-foot strip along that 300-foot section is clearly documented as Hargrove Ranch land, which it always was and which it will remain. Bud Tatum told me, after the removal was complete and the final paperwork was signed, that in 30 years of ranch boundary work he had seen a lot of disputes and a lot of resolutions, but that the cattle trough had been a particular touch. I told him it was just good ranch management. He said he knew, And he said it with the smile of a man who had been practicing property law in Texas long enough to appreciate the specific language that ranchers use when they are making a point. The eastern pasture is quiet now. The fence line runs straight and properly marked. The cattle graze through in the morning and come to their water point in the afternoon, and the land does what it has done for 3 generations of Hargroves, which is exactly what land is supposed to do when it is properly maintained and properly defended. The pool is gone, every cubic foot of it, removed and hauled away at the property management company's expense, which came to more than the original construction cost when you factored in demolition, haul-off, and restoration. The $100,000 pool that should never have been built cost them something closer to $160,000 by the time it was gone, plus the $38,000 they had paid me, plus their legal costs throughout. That is what happens when you build something on land that does not belong to you and then fight the man whose land it is instead of working with him from the start. My father told me a long time ago that in Texas, land disputes have a way of revealing what people are made of. The people who built that pool without checking their survey, who kept pouring concrete while a cease and desist sat on their attorney's desk, who tried to negotiate a 10-year easement instead of taking ownership of their mistake, they showed what they were made of. I showed what I was made of too. 487 acres, properly surveyed, properly documented, properly maintained, 200 head of Angus, watered and fed, a ranch that was here before me and will be here after.